Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Paul Matthew Thompson and Jude Tindall's show, Shakespeare and Hathaway, Private Investigators. So this is a British crime comedy drama. The British seem to love detective stories, based on what I've seen of British TV, contemporary British TV. There's tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of detective programs. Yeah, seems extremely popular with the British. And that's totally fine. If that's what they want, that's what they want. No worries. No judgment. So, Shakespeare and Hathaway is set in the town of Stratford-upon-Avon, which, as everyone knows, is the birthplace of William Shakespeare, the famous playwright. Not everyone knows that, but that's true. That's a true historical fact. You can take that to cocktail parties and impress people. So it's set in Stratford-upon-Avon, which is actually a very nice little town. I've been there twice, maybe. It somewhat like a place like Gettysburg in the U.S. Stratford-upon-Avon is kind of a town whose fortunes are built around one specific thing, right? Not everything in Stratford is Shakespeare themed, but boy howdy, a lot of it is. And that's because this is major tourism money, right? This is a major source of revenue for the town. The reason that people go to Stratford-upon-Avon, generally, who are not from Stratford-upon-Avon, the reason people go is because of Shakespeare. And there are historical sites. The Royal Shakespeare Company is headquartered there. There's all kinds of bars and restaurants and pubs and walking tours, and everything is built around Shakespeare because, again, that's where the money is. And again, no, I'm not saying that to be judgmental of the town. Like they've done a really good job marketing themselves, and for that reason, they are probably more prosperous than many other comparable English towns. But that does kind of mean that when you set a show in Stratford-upon-Avon, particularly if your protagonists are called Lou Shakespeare and Frank Hathaway, Anne Hathaway was Shakespeare's wife, by the way. That was her maiden name, was Anne Hathaway. She became Anne Shakespeare. No, that might not be right. Was her name Anne? Let me just look that up, because that kind of doesn't immediately feel right. I think that's right, but yes, Anne Hathaway. I was right. Anyway, so interestingly enough, it is not until the penultimate episode, the ninth episode of the fourth series, fourth of four, 9th out of 10 episodes, that anybody mentions that Hathaway was the last name of Shakespeare's wife. So it's been Shakespeare and Hathaway for 4 seasons, and no one has ever brought that up. I find that fascinating. But that's part of the weird, quirky culture of this show, where everything is built around Shakespeare. You get characters with Shakespearean names. You get plots drawn from Shakespeare's plays, etc., etc. Like, in one episode quite early on, they're investigating a death in a nursing home, and the sort of curmudgeonly old guy is named Mr. Falstaff. At one point, you have an episode where this inn and hotel and bar is run by the Montague family, but the Capulet family, who has their sort of investment firm or whatever, their big sort of financial, we're wearing suits type bullshit, they think that they actually own the land and the hotel, but there has been a sort of long-standing agreement where the lease with the Montagues would be renewed. So you have this rivalry between the Capulets and the Montagues, and it turns out that the sons of each of those families are actually in love with one another, and they bridge the gap, and it's beautiful, and whatever. So it is, again, this sort of very, very, it kind of fits very well with Stratford-upon-Avon as a place, in that the show is equally invested in these Shakespearean references, this sense of Shakespeare as a sort of guiding principle and a money-making principle. Now, the other thing that I think is really interesting about this show, because I don't have a lot more to say about that necessarily. It's a kind of interesting gimmick, and it does set Shakespeare and Hathaway private investigators apart from other British crime shows, detective shows, etc., etc. But I don't have a tremendous amount more to say about that. But what I do think, one of the things that I think makes the show really work is they have a triangle of primary characters. So we have Lou Shakespeare, played by Jo Joyner. And she is a former hairdresser who decides... So in the first episode, she is getting married, but she hires Frank Hathaway, played by Mark Benton, to investigate her fiance, because she is concerned that he's having an affair. Turns out that he's a scammer. He marries women and then steals all their money and then fakes his death and pieces out. He gets murdered, so, sucks to his Asmar. But they managed to get Lou's money back. And since Frank's business is going under, his stuff is getting repossessed, he's going to get kicked out. She then uses some of her money that she made from selling her hairdressing business to pay his debts in exchange for becoming his partner. She has no investigative training. She has no background as a detective or anything like this, but she has very good intuition. Frank Hathaway, for his part, is a former detective inspector. So he had been a sort of top tier guy in the Stratford-upon-Avon police service, and we find out later on that he caught one of his subordinates planting evidence, and he took the fall for it, so that her name is Christina Marlowe. Christopher Marlowe was one of Shakespeare's most famous today contemporaries. I think at the time he was one of his most famous contemporaries as well, in part because he had a whole adventurous life. That's not the story here. So Frank had sort of unceremoniously been kicked out of the police service, and he goes into private investigation. So he's still using his skills. Then the other main character in the show is Sebastian Brudenell, who's played by Patrick Walsh McBride. Sebastian is a RADA trained, which would be the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, if I'm not mistaken. He is a RADA trained actor, and so he ends up often being the person who sort of goes undercover for them. And there's a lot of acting in this show. There's a lot of performance, both in terms of Sebastian, and to a lesser extent, Lou and or Frank going undercover. But also, there's so many of these episodes that center around, like, here's a theater company, and there's been a murder at the theater company, or here's a walking tour, which, it's Shakespearean costume, and the person talks in early modern English, and it's all flowery and whatnot, and there's been a murder there. This is a Shakespeare museum, and there's been a murder there. So again, the fact that it's Stratford-upon-Avon means that it is saturated with Shakespeare. And so that becomes a big thing with Sebastian, is that that becomes really his role in the play, or in the TV series, sorry, is that he is the acting expert, and he's the going undercover expert, etc., etc. But part of the reason that the show, I think, is so successful and does really work quite well is because these three characters, these three actors, have very good chemistry. So you get that sort of triangle that I think works really, really well. And you think about other sort of famous, successful detective series, is you often have this kind of structure where you've got often three people, sometimes two. I mean, Shakespeare, Holmes and Watson is the famous duo, but you've also got Inspector Lestrade, who's the sort of third part of that. In Agatha Christie's Poirot, starring David Suchet, you've got Poirot, you've got Arthur Hastings, and you've got Miss Lemon, that trio. And so that's a really good approach to constructing a successful and long-lasting TV show, especially something where you have a core group of characters, and then, as is generally the case with detective shows, murder mysteries, things like that, you have a small core group of characters, and then you have a varying cast per episode, right? So in Shakespeare Hathaway, those three characters are the only ones, I think, who show up in every episode. There's one police inspector, Detective Sergeant Joseph Keeler, who he may be in every episode as well, because he initially is Marlowe's sort of right-hand person, but then when Marlowe leaves at the end of series 2, Keeler steps up and he becomes sort of the lead investigator. So he may be in every episode, but Lou, Frank, and Sebastian are definitely in every episode. And so you have really that sort of core group that things are built around. And one of the main things that you need to keep our interest as viewers in this kind of structure is we need an interesting dynamic among the protagonists. So even though we don't have many sort of long drawn-out storylines with them, they have distinctive characteristics, objectives, worldviews, etc., that you develop over the course of the series, or over the course of the show. And having them play off of one another to build those characteristics works really, really well. So I think the combination of those two things, that sort of very effective formula of three investigators who each have their own distinctive skill set, knowledge, ability, and worldview, and who gel quite well as performers, combined with the quirkiness of so much of the show being dominated by the spirit of Shakespeare, if you will, it makes for a very, very interesting and unique detective show within a genre, a detective genre that is very, very populated on British TV.